Okay, Year 10, welcome to the first video that I've made for the 2020 to 21 class in my English lessons. So what we're going to do in this video is I'm going to show you how you can prepare cue cards, revision cards for an inspector call. So, you know, a revision card tends to be like this sort of sized piece of paper, and what you'll need to really start this process is your gold quotations handout, and then potentially your exercise book as well, depending on how detailed you want to go with your references. So what we need to learn specifically is the gold quotations, the language involved in the gold quotations, and anything else that we can then link to that will be useful for an essay. So what we start by doing is, I always like to have one side of the card that is what I call the clean version. Okay, so if we just write unpleasant business on this side, that is what we look at and we sort of say, what can we remember from that? It's the other side where the content goes, but if we want to test ourselves, it's nice to have a clean version. So on the flip side, this is where our main work's going to go. So we're going to put unpleasant business, and while we're here, we're going to say that Burling says this to the inspector in his initial exchanges, and really at the time it's about Sheila. Okay, and if you know a little bit more about the quotation, it's something along the lines of, I don't see why my daughter should be dragged into this unpleasant business. Okay, so we'll just put dragged up there as well. Okay, now the thing that you've got to learn in order to sort of make sure you're analysing language is the AO2 content. So the AO2 content, if we go back to our sheet, you probably can't see that there. Okay, unpleasant business is a sort of euphemism for suicide, the suicide of Eva Smith. Okay, so euphemism for suicide, and that's kind of our AO2. And as well, we might also talk about the AO2, the verb dragged. The idea perhaps that it kind of suggests Sheila won't have a choice, neither will the rest of the family in the end. Okay, so we've got our language down first of all. Now, in terms of our AO1, obviously that's kind of understanding the characters and the actions and the theme and so forth. You know, so the kinds of things I'm going to put in here are, well, obviously this might be a useful quotation if we want to talk about Sheila and her position in the family. It could be a useful quotation for a Burling essay, and, you know, his attitude towards the inspector. It's obviously good for anything to do with rich and poor or community, because really this is a quotation to do with Sheila, but it's just as much about Eva. Okay, and particularly the contrast perhaps between Eva's life and Sheila's life. You know, they're both the same age, they're both you know, young women, and yet Burling doesn't want Sheila dragged in, but he does. He has you know, involved himself with Eva, and he's happy to use the same age girls in his own factory. So then we start sort of saying, well, what does this show? And this can kind of overlap with AO1 and AO3. So I'll pop the initial ideas, you know, the analysis. It's also the analysis of AO2. So perhaps we'll say here that, you know, Burling is wanting to avoid the reality of the situation, or at least he would like his family to avoid that reality. I know green's not the best colour for this. What I would definitely say is that, you know, there is double standards at play. Okay, very much linking to the difference between Eva's life and Sheila's life. Okay, so we've got our AO1 and AO2. We can analyse the quotation, we can say sensible things about the language. What that then leaves us with, if I can find the right colour pen, which is a perp, no which isn't, which is going to be red, is the AO3 content. Okay, so we've got, you know, things that it's to do with, and then things that link in. So in terms of AO3, we've got loads of things. We've got the concepts of community. We've got the idea of rich and poor and class difference. We've got the realities of capitalism, that Mr. Burling, you know, can use these women for his workplace. We've probably got the idea of kind of power and privilege, both on the part of Mr. Burling's power and to an extent on Sheila's privilege and how she avoids that. Okay, sorry, I just had to reset my computer. Then we also perhaps need to think about, things we can bring in to do with context of the time. So this very much feels to me like we could talk about the women in World War II and the fact that they did additional roles, and that we know that, Sheila would probably have been involved in that. We can talk about Sheila's, her own moral journey. She goes from naive to aware. We might talk as well about women's rights and the vote, just because those are all the things denied to Eva, and Berling would like to keep it that way, but the world is changing and the audience would know that by this time. Okay, so what you end up with is you don't end up with this quotation just suiting one essay. You have different ways that you could use this quotation depending on what the essay question would be. Okay, and so then we've got our clean version and our version that we could use in a variety of essays. Just to show you one other quickly, okay, we could, one of my favourite ones, there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths, and we could talk about the word hopes, fears and intertwined. And then you can probably pause this to have a look at it and copy it, but I'd be talking about obviously the hyperbole, the abstract nouns hopes and fears, the verb intertwined, and how that's Priestley's message. This would suit almost any essay on any character because every character is intertwined with Eva Smith's and John Smith's. Obviously rich and poor, community, that would fit well. This gives us a chance to talk about the welfare state post-war, the formation of the NHS, that idea of togetherness, and ultimately in AO3 it's the inspector as Priestley's mouthpiece giving that criticism of capitalism, this emphasis on the exploitation of the working class. And so again, we can see how that quotation could probably take its place in a couple of character essays and certainly in a few of the theme essays too. So there you go. Your job is to make cue cards from all the goal quotations, obviously learn the quotations and particularly the AO2, and then as you do that process you'll start to bring in, I think, the AO3 quite naturally because we've hammered those ideas in class. There you go.